Hello and welcome to a pro basketball show with me, Andrew Willett. We're in the midst of WNBA coverage and excited to bring our content to you. You can catch a pro basketball show on streaming services such as YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify with live broadcasts on playback. Make sure to follow us at APBShow on social media platforms such as Twitter and Instagram, with more coming soon. Without further ado, a pro basketball show. Hello and welcome to a pro basketball show. We are joined today by Akiem Bailum, and Akiem, we are going to talk about, you had a recent article come out and it made me just think, you know what, it is Pride Month, it's June and the month of June, and it is time, especially covering a league like the WNBA, to take the time and acknowledge how important inclusivity is, intersectionality and diversity, and what better way to do that than to embrace the LGBTQIA plus community. And we're going to do that today by just kind of going over a few things in your article. Great article, by the way. Akiem Bailum, thank you so much for joining the show here. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Like you said, we're a few weeks into the WNBA season. Of course, it's Pride Month, and obviously with the W's history with the LGBTQIA plus community, it's definitely a situation where I decided, you know what, with the WNBA's history with this community, I decided, you know what, this is a good idea to really put an article together. So that's how everything kind of came together.
Yeah, and with the current climate that we are in, it was definitely fitting to touch on that community, how they're being treated by other sports leagues, as well as touch on a little bit of the history, like you mentioned, with the W and the LGBTQ plus community. But as we start to, before we even get to all of that, what have you been up to recently? What are you working on right now?
I've been up to a lot, man. I've been up to a lot. Sometimes I feel like there's so much going on. I feel like I wish that there was 5 or 10 of me as opposed to just one of me. But I'm in Columbia, South Carolina, of course, the home of the South Carolina Gamecocks. I've been traveling all over the place. I do a little bit of AAU stuff as well for this website called Prep Girls Hoops. So I've been doing a lot, man. I've been doing a lot. Getting ready to go out to Vegas next month and just doing a lot of things, always coming up with new article ideas and just living the life, man.
That's awesome. You know, you said the 5 or 10. You wish there were 5 of you. I couldn't relate more. I know I'm trying to run this podcast as well as take some summertime. I'm doing some wedding planning as well, and it's definitely at that point where you're hoping, you wish you just had a couple more eyes, couple more hands on all sorts of different things. But we're happy to be joined by you here today. Thank you again for taking the time. Well, let's dig right into this article. From the get-go, you touch on some of the issues facing the LGBTQIA plus community, and whether that be laws in several states being put into place, that's hatred being felt, and it almost feels a little more okay for that hatred to be out there. What challenges have been facing that community?
Well, there's a lot of challenges, obviously, whether it's, just the ability for those in that community to just be able to live their lives in peace, particularly with sports. I mean, we've seen in a lot of states where, including Iowa, where they're trying to restrict transgender kids from the ability to even play sports. I mean, it's a full court press by states like Iowa, Tennessee, Florida, in terms of being able to, in terms of what they're trying to do to really marginalize a community that has been marginalized for such a long time. But I feel like in a lot of ways, the tide is changing. I feel like a lot of us understand, hey, look, the LGBTQ plus community, all they want to do is live their lives. All they want to do is live their lives with equal rights as everybody else. And, and I think that because of that, there's more awareness in terms of what this community is facing. And I think one of the things as well that I'm glad that I mentioned in the article was how there's so much, like there's a lot of individuals out there that will go ahead and they will use the phrase protect women's sports, quote unquote.
Mm.
But the secret about those that love to talk about, oh, protect women's sports, a lot of these folks could not name 15 WNBA players without Googling. And the only one they probably could name is Brittany Griner. So it's so amazing how you have a lot of individuals out there that are really being very, very hypocritical when they talk about, oh, protect women's sports, when really it's just a way that they're trying to use this to really try to discriminate against the transgender community. And, with what we've seen in so many different states, I feel like it only gives Pride Month even more meaning than what it's had before, because it's really time, in my opinion, for us to really just come together as a culture, to come together as a people, and really understand that, look, we got your back. We got your back. I'm a straight man, but I am in full support of LGBTQ plus rights. So I think that this is a community that needs to hear that, and they need to understand that from allies like myself, that, hey, there are folks out here that don't have these hateful views, and that we actually do have their backs.
And that's kind of been one of my favorite things. You mentioned just how important the month of June is. I keep seeing, for all of the homophobes, for all of the transphobes, I hope they are incredibly uncomfortable during this month, because you're right.
Exactly.
There are a lot of people like you or me who are on their side. And it's important for us as well to not only talk about these issues, but to try the best that we can to be good allies to them. And I think your article was a great way to talk about that, because there is a lot going on right now between those laws in those states, and just the attacks, the hatred, the discrimination on trans athletes, as well as we start to transition into the way that this runs into sports. But it's just such a small portion of the population that they're using for their own political gain, and just hating and discriminating against, which is just awful. But when that comes to sports, you mentioned at the high school level, a lot of these protect women's sports individuals, and I use air quotes there, that they don't actually care about sports, but it is happening on a professional level as well, with leagues like the NHL and the MLB. How is this happening?
It's happening because the NHL and MLB are really having PR problems in terms of how to do Pride nights, how to do Pride months. I mean, we have seen, especially in NHL and MLB, we saw this a few months ago with NHL, where we've had players speak out against wearing rainbow shirts. And that really hurt the NHL standing within the LGBTQ plus community. And I'm glad that I mentioned in the article one of the taglines that the NHL is really trying to really put itself out there to market itself toward a broader audience, is this idea of hockey being for everyone. Well, if hockey really was for everyone, why are they giving in to the voices of a few? And then on top of everything else, they're using their Christian faith. That's another thing that they're doing. They're using their Christian faith as sort of a cross to really hide their homophobia and their transphobia, because you and me both know lots of church-going folks that have no problems with supporting the LGBTQ plus community. So it's really a crutch that they're trying to use, and the NHL has really hurt its standing within this community. We're seeing the same with Major League Baseball, where we've had individuals like Clayton Kershaw of the LA Dodgers. Now, anybody who has followed Clayton Kershaw over the years, this shouldn't be all that much of a problem because of how he's really been open about his Christian faith and everything. But when the LA Dodgers wanted to have their own Pride Night, I believe they're having their Pride Night later on this month, and they wanted to bring in a drag show as part of that Pride Month, we heard Clayton Kershaw speak out about it. We heard Trevor Williams of the Washington Nationals speak out about it. So we've heard some we've heard some influential voices within Major League Baseball speak out about it. And it's interesting because when you look at the NHL and you look at MLB, these are a couple of sports that already have problems in terms of representation. And hockey's are bigger than that of baseball's. Because one thing about Major League Baseball, is that it has a huge, robust population of Hispanic players, particularly Cuban players who defect from Cuba. But in terms of the NHL, we've seen how badly their representation problems are in terms of Black and brown players. So NHL, the fact that they're having problems with the LGBTQ plus community and the fact that Major League Baseball is also having problems within this same community, these are two sports in hockey and baseball, both going through their own culturally induced identity crises that can ill afford anything more, such as what they're going through.
And those are two sports as well that are struggling to even retain viewers or gain viewers as they try to build up their respective leagues. But I don't know. I moved to something like what Ari Chambers said. I believe it was the end of last month where she mentioned that it was just disheartening to her that the amount of people who try to use their faith, their religion, to allow them to use hatred. And I mean, I was very disappointed when I heard about Clayton Kershaw and the bigotry that he spread, and as well as all of the other things that you point out in your article. And before we get to why the WNBA is a more accepting and a better league for this community, I am curious because you mentioned several times that they mishandled the LGBTQ plus community prior to becoming the league that we know today in 2023. So I guess how did the W treat and mishandle this group prior to?
I mean, when you look at the marketing that the WNBA did in its early days when it first was starting out, it was really kind of antagonistic to the LGBTQIA plus community. This was actually mentioned on numerous occasions in the Unfinished Business documentary that profiles the WNBA through the lens of the New York Liberty. So this was something that even the W, even in its early days, was actually struggling with. But I think what the WNBA understood throughout its history as it continued to grow more and more and more into the sport that we know it today, I think they realized, similar to also what they realize about is having a huge amount of Black players, I think they also understood that there's a lot of players within this community that really and truly they need to understand and they really need to try to feel welcome. And you see it even in today's WNBA, whether it's Brianna Stewart, whether it's Elena Delle Donne, whether it's Jonquel Jones, whether it's the recently retired Sue Bird. I think that what the WNBA understood is that why is it are we marginalizing a community that actually a good number of our players are part of? And what the WNBA has understood now is through its change in mindset, it's a huge deal within the LGBTQIA plus community. You ask anybody within this community, they were riding the WNBA wave before it was cool to all of a sudden ride the WNBA wave. So they understood something before the masses did, and the support that the W has received throughout the LGBTQIA plus community has really been, in my opinion, an integral part of why the WNBA is growing and why it's continuing to grow to this day.
That's really special and kind of lovely that they were able to come to that realization. But like for the the WNBA is the Women's National Basketball Association, and that has really almost transitioned to a different name in the W. And I think what more than anything they found is important is that they're fighting for the rights and the equality of women in women's sports. And that same battle resides within uh, the fight for LGBTQIA plus rights as well. So they understand that the fight for equality and liberty for one group is going to mean the same for another marginalized group. And I think that's really special that they've been able to come so far from where they got started as the WNBA. And you also mentioned in your article the NWSL as kind of the gold standard here for how leagues can be inclusive and be accepting and embrace the LGBTQIA plus community. How can the W even be better than they are right now? What other steps can they take?
Well, one thing that I feel like the WNBA can definitely do is I feel like they certainly need to identify markets. And I know this kind of goes into the constant expansion talk, which is always a hot button topic within WNBA circles. But I feel like one of the things that they can definitely do is they can even do even more outreach to this community. They can even do, and the thing is, the fact that there is already such a robust LGBTQIA plus community within the WNBA, they can really use that to their advantage and really, really use that in order to push the WNBA's product. Because one thing that more and more and more people are understanding is that the WNBA has a really great product. So I think that's something that they can certainly do. I think another thing that they can certainly do, and like I said, it goes back to the expansion talk, is when they think about which markets that they want to expand to, think about which markets already have a robust populace in terms of the LGBTQ community. One of the markets that always gets mentioned within WNBA circles as a possible candidate for expansion is Oakland. The Bay Area is notably one of the largest LGBTQIA plus friendly cities in the entire United States of America. So when Kathy Engelbert and when everybody at WNBA HQ in New York, when they think about which cities that they want to do special events such as expansion, such as the All-Star game or such as what we saw earlier with the Canada game in Toronto, when they're thinking about markets that they want to expand to, I feel like that's definitely something that they really need to give a lot of that they really need to give a lot of credit to and a lot of just everything to. So I think that those are really good opportunities to really broaden their outreach toward this community.
And as for other sports that we've mentioned, the NHL, the MLB, what are kind of their next steps in order to solve some of these issues? Because those are some pretty large issues, and it's going to cause some ruffles. It's just not good. What can they do to almost resolve this issue and then take steps in the right direction?
Well, I think what they need to do is that they need to understand is if baseball and if hockey are really going to be sports of the future, that they cannot continue to simply market to the same fans that they've been marketing to for ages. I come from baseball. I grew up in a baseball household. I watched baseball growing up. I'm very familiar with the sport. I still religiously watch the sport to this day. I'm slowly but surely trying to get more into hockey. But one thing I know that those two sports definitely need to do is they need to be real about their outreach. And that's another thing I feel like that both the NHL and MLB need to be really held accountable for. Is it's one thing to hold a Pride Night. It's one thing to celebrate Pride Month. We see that with sports all over the place. Everybody's decking themselves out in the Pride in the rainbow colors and the transgender support flag. Everybody's decking out in these colors for Pride Month, Pride Week, Pride Night, whatever. And that's all fine and good. But at the same time, it's a situation I feel like, and this is all sports and this is all leagues, I feel like these sports and these leagues, they need to be proactive in their support, because it's one thing to support the LGBTQIA plus community during Pride Month. It's another thing to be proactive in their support of this community 365 days a year. So this community can understand, hey, look, this isn't just something that we're doing just as a PR outreach. This is something that we're being proactive with. This is something that we're really doing for real. And this is something that we're really all about. So supporting the community, supporting measures in the political arena that are in support of this community, I feel like those are things that sports leagues, sports ownerships, as well as players themselves can really do, because it's communities like that that are going to determine the future of sports going forward. And another thing I feel like they need to understand is supporting marginalized communities like the LGBTQIA plus community, as well as the brown communities and the Asian communities and the Black communities. It's not just good to do. One thing that I feel like corporate world is understanding, it's also good business to do.
That's very true. I mean, it's I think the W's, like you had mentioned, is a great example of that, where they have embraced not only LGBTQIA plus players, but also fans. And I guess kind of your whole point here was that these other leagues have almost ostracized fans, and that the W is a great place for those fans to come and feel safe and be embraced. Why is the W such a great place for that? Why is it just such a good partnership?
It's a great partnership. I think the WNBA has understood not only is it good business, but it's also good PR. We've
Mm,
seen the WNBA march in Pride Month in New York City. We've seen the WNBA be really in big time support of this community over the years. And like we were saying a little bit earlier, it's definitely in stark contrast to what the WNBA was in its early days. So it's really overall part of the fact that the WNBA over the years, and we particularly saw this during Lisa Borders' presidency before Kathy Engelbert became
mm,
commissioner, but we particularly saw this during the years of Lisa Borders. The WNBA has really built itself up into not just being a great sports product, but also being a very progressive league. We saw that in the bubble when we had players that were marching in support, even though they were in the bubble, they were marching in support of the families of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. They were marching against the Atlanta Dream's former owner and Kelly Loeffler in support of Raphael Warnock to defeat her in that Senate race. So when you think about those sorts of things, when you
mm.
think about the fact that we've had teams such as the Seattle Storm and the New York Liberty come out in support of Planned Parenthood, really and truly, the WNBA has really put itself out there, as well as the NWSL as well. Women's sports, in more ways than one, have really led the way in the sports realm in terms of the progressive future that sports is slowly but surely inching towards. And the support of the LGBTQIA plus community is one element of that. So the WNBA didn't necessarily always get it at first, but now they're getting it, and we're seeing the results.
And it's just such an inclusive league. It's really important for what it does. It's not only like you said a progressive league, but an inclusive community for members of the LGBTQ plus community that can be a part of the WNBA fan base and can feel like they are a part of something so good. And like you said, it's a great product, and the WNBA is doing a lot of important work from what you mentioned in the bubble to like they're just enacting change. And hey, it's another reason why Pride Month so very important. And Akeem, your article so well done. And yeah, we fully accept all new fans and are happy to uh be that community here with the W fans. And yeah, Akeem, great job on that. Thank you so much for being willing to talk about that. Let's talk some basketball if you don't mind here on a pro basketball show. But
Not a problem, as always.
yeah, Akeem, all decked out
Got
over
to.
here in the suit. He's ready to talk some W all day. We're just about a few weeks into the season. What are some of your early takeaways from a young WNBA season?
Well, of course, there's a lot of seasons still left to go. Championships definitely are not won in June, but there are a few things that I'm already seeing with the WNBA season. I mean, obviously, all the attention has been on the two super teams, the Aces and Liberty. And unfortunately, the Liberty's game today got canceled because of the smoke in New York coming from those Canadian wildfires. Hopefully, everybody in New York has been feeling safe. But there's been a lot going on within the WNBA. Obviously, the LA, the Vegas Aces, they're still undefeated as of today, as of this recording. But one thing that I'm starting to notice with the Aces is we're starting to see teams maybe, just maybe, start to figure out Vegas out, because that's real critical for the other 11 teams. Because I think it's well established that the road to a championship in the WNBA, it goes through Sin City. So we've seen in recent games that the Aces have played, whether it's Atlanta, whether it's Indiana, whether it's the most recent game that they've played against Connecticut, we've seen teams start to really play the Aces really tough. And I think that also applies to the earlier game that they played in LA against the Sparks, even though, of course, the Aces eventually came back to win that game. But we're starting to see some things. So the Aces, being undefeated, that's definitely a story. Connecticut, I feel like Connecticut is once again one of those teams that obviously is the object of everybody's disrespect, CT, in in all caps. But Stephanie White has done something up there in Connecticut. Alyssa Thomas is once again having a very productive season. Dewana Bonner is once again having a very productive season. So a lot of people, I think, were sort of looking at the Connecticut Sun like they were going to be one of those teams that may take somewhat of a step back. Connecticut is showing everybody that even after losing Jonquel Jones to the Liberty, and even after losing Jasmine Thomas to the Sparks, they have not skipped a beat. They're coming for another championship. Connecticut is once again looking like a dangerous team. Now, on to the Liberty. The Liberty have been somewhat up and down. Now, 4-2 is 4-2. 4-2 is 4-2, and you definitely would rather be 4-2 rather than 2-4 or 1-5. But I think one of the things that is kind of a thing with the Liberty is they're still trying to figure their team out. Really, all 12 teams are still trying to figure their teams out. But I think the thing with the Liberty is they don't necessarily know exactly how they're going to run their offense. Are they going to run their offense through Stewie? Are they going to run their offense through Sloot? Are they going to run their offense through Sabrina? Are they going to run their offense through JJ? So that's kind of the thing that I think is really the question mark, really, with the Liberty. But I feel like as the season goes, because if it's one thing that we know in basketball, whether it's WNBA or NBA, the cream always rises to the crop. So I know a lot of Liberty fans were really panicking after that season opener at Washington. And that's why me and a bunch of other folks on WNBA Twitter were like, RELAX, doing the Aaron Rodgers relax. So I think the Liberty would be fine. But I think the story so far of the 2023 WNBA season has been Chicago, the Chicago Sky. And I think what James Wade, I think early on going on this season, I think James Wade and Stephanie White are probably the two leaders in the clubhouse in terms of coach of the year, because everybody, including myself, I had the Chicago Sky 11th in my preseason power rankings for Beyond the W. I thought Chicago was going to be on a rebuild, but James Wade and that whole team have kind of used everybody's doubt, and all the doubters like myself, they've sort of used it as bulletin board material. And we're seeing it so far with what they've done throughout the season. And really and truly, when you think about it, a couple of the Sky's losses really weren't bad losses. The only loss that you can really say that was a bad loss was when they played the Dream in Atlanta. But when you think about it, the loss that they had to the Mystics on their home court, that was a narrow loss. The loss that they had to the Liberty, also at home, that was a narrow loss. So a lot of folks are really eating a lot of crow, and a lot of folks are now looking at the Chicago Sky as if, wait a second, this is a team that could possibly, just maybe make another playoff run. So I think the Chicago Sky has been another one of those big stories. And another big story that is also catching my attention, Aaliyah Boston looks like a veteran. Aaliyah Boston looks like a straight-up veteran. She is by far right now the leader in the clubhouse for Rookie of the Year. And I actually wrote in an article for Beyond the W that I just put out there just yesterday. I think Aaliyah Boston deserves all-star votes. We're recording this right now on the day that all-star voting started through the WNBA. Aaliyah Boston better get some all-star votes. She's popular throughout the country. She's popular throughout women's basketball. And you know those South Carolina fans are going to be stuffing them ballots to make sure that Aaliyah Boston gets to Vegas. So she's the leader in the clubhouse for Rookie of the Year. She dropped 25 and 11 in a very competitive game for the Fever against the Sky, even though it came in a loss. But Aaliyah Boston is looking like a seasoned veteran. Dare I say, Aaliyah Las Vegas.
Oh, all right. I love it. You know what? Those are so many great takeaways from what has been a young season, because I think it has been a phenomenal start to this season, where we've seen close battles here and there. And as you mentioned, like some of these games are pretty tight, and that's because all of these teams are learning themselves at this point in the WNBA season. I think the teams like Las Vegas is probably best positioned to kind of know who they are and settle into a cohesive unit because they add a piece as good and as seamless of a fit as Candace Parker is, and Alicia Clark as well. Both just can fit into a role on a team that is already the champions. And they've been number one in my power rankings from the very start. I think they deserve that spot after winning and adding Candace Parker. And I think they can maintain that. As for a couple of other teams, Connecticut, I was very high on in my preview. Actually, my breakdown that I just had with their play-by-play broadcaster. Um, I talked to Brendan Glashing about like, hey, this is a team before the season. I had Stephanie White as my coach of the year. I had Alyssa Thomas as my defensive player of the year. I think I chose the wrong member of the Connecticut Sun and saying Bree Jones was my MVP. I think it's Alyssa Thomas so far, but I was very high on the Sun coming into the season. So I'm right up there with you. I think they aren't necessarily on that top tier of the two super teams, but I do believe they are a contender. I'm curious from your perspective, do you see any other teams, Las Vegas, New York, Connecticut, even Washington? Are there any other teams that are contenders in your opinion?
Well, when the season started, of course, so much attention was on the Aces and the Liberty. And one of the things that I really wanted to emphasize were the possibility of there could be teams that may very well give the Aces and Liberty a scare. And there were two teams that stuck out to me. The first was the Washington Mystics, because if it's one thing that we know about the Washington Mystics over the years, their ability to be contenders rests on the health of Elena Delle Donne. Elena Delle Donne said before the season that she's fully healthy. So I was thinking, okay, look out, Washington's on the up and up again. So I was looking at Washington as a possible contender, and we saw that in the season opener with what they were able to do at home against the Liberty. So you got Elena Delle Donne, and of course, you got Shakira Austin, who in a lot of ways is who EDD is going to pass the torch to once EDD calls it a career. So, and it's amazing because Shakira Austin had a great year last year. She was right there in the Rookie of the Year conversation from start to finish with Ryan Howard of the Atlanta Dream. And Shakira Austin is also somebody that I wrote about in a recent article for Beyond the W that I believe deserves some all-star love this year. So Washington was one of the teams that I definitely figured could be a possible contender. And the second team, even though they've been kind of up and down, the second team that I was looking at was the LA Sparks. I was really high on the LA Sparks prior to the start of the season. Kurt Miller, bringing him in from Connecticut. They hired Karen Bryan as their new general manager. So I was really high on the LA Sparks prior to the start of the season. And it looked like, based on their season opener that they had against the Phoenix Mercury, it looked like maybe we were starting to see some things with the Sun. Of course, Nneka Ogwumike is back. Of course, Shanae Ogwumike is back. But Zia Cook really impressed in that season opener. But we've kind of seen that the Sparks have been kind of up and down. And we saw that in that most recent game that they played against the Seattle Storm, where they took a 24-6 lead only to lose it 66-63. So that was another team that I figured could really be a team that could give the Aces and Liberty a bit of a scare as far as the landscape of the WNBA. And now, through a bit of the season, we're also seeing maybe Connecticut is one of those teams. Maybe the Chicago Sky is one of those teams. Maybe the Dallas Wings do something with the season that Satu Sabali, also deserving of all-star love, by the way, and MVP consideration. We're starting to see something even with the Dallas Wings. Imagine if we see Satu and Arike, a two-headed monster in Dallas. Woo, look out. But if it's another thing that I think we're starting to see within the WNBA is that no lead is safe. No lead is safe in the W. You may think that you have a 19-point lead like the Liberty did on their home court against the Chicago Sky, only to lose it late in the second half. You may think that you have a safe lead like the Sparks had against the Seattle Storm, and then all of a sudden you lose it late, only to lose by 3 points. So if it's one thing that we're seeing, and this I feel like is also the case with teams like the Indiana Fever and the Atlanta Dream that have proven themselves to be fourth quarter teams, no lead is safe in the W. So even in the fourth quarter, if you have a double-digit lead, You cannot rest on your laurels and think you're just going to cruise to victory. There's a reason as to why these are the most 144 elite players in the world. A 15-point lead can be a 3-point lead in the snap of a finger.
Just like that. And you know what? I think we all feel the same way. I think where you weren't there with Connecticut, I was way off on LA because I had them as last heading into the season. Right now, that is from the opening game, I knew that was way off. Other than that, I mean, I would maybe flip them with where I have Phoenix. I am going to ask you before we run out of time here. I am curious if I made you pick right now, who's missing the WNBA playoffs? What 4 teams do not make the cut at the end of the year? I know before the season I had LA. I think I would swap them with Phoenix, who I did have making the playoffs, who very well could make a run at it. But I had Phoenix, Indiana, Minnesota, and Seattle as the 4 teams not making it. Who do you like, or who do you think won't make this year's playoffs?
Oh, this is a tough one.
Mm-hmm.
This is a tough one because I had Chicago as one of the teams that I figured would miss the playoffs prior to the start of the season. Forgive me, James Wade. But one of the teams I feel like will miss the playoffs, I'm looking at Minnesota. I'm looking at Minnesota as a team that I think could, miss the playoffs. I'm looking at a team like maybe the Seattle Storm that will probably be on the outside looking in. I'm also looking at a team like Indiana. I know that there's been so much around Aaliyah Boston and there's so much hype around Aaliyah Boston and everything that she's doing, but I think Indiana probably is going to be another one of those teams that may very well miss the postseason. And then after that, it's kind of hard to decide because when you look at the WNBA really from 1 to 9, it's really a situation where one of those 9 teams that will be on the outside looking in is more than likely a playoff caliber team. So I know that there are some people that are going to be looking at a team like Dallas. I know there are going to be some people that are going to look at a team like Phoenix as a possible team that may miss the playoffs. I know some people are going to even look at a team like Atlanta, even though I have the Atlanta Dream making the playoffs this year. So I think outside of Indiana, Seattle, and Minnesota, it's kind of hard to decide because there's so much talent up and down this league with all these teams. Out of those 3, and we knew that Seattle and Minnesota were going into this season as somewhat rebuilding, but outside of those 2, along with Indiana, it's kind of hard to decide.
Agreed. You know what, Akiem Bailum, thank you so much for taking the time. A very important conversation as Happy Pride Month, but great work you do over there at Beyond the W. Thank you so much for taking the time to join the show.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for tuning into A Pro Basketball Show. You can catch A Pro Basketball Show on streaming services such as YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify with live broadcasts on playback. Make sure to follow us at APBShow on social media platforms such as Twitter and Instagram with more coming soon. Until next time, I am Andrew Willett. Thank you for tuning in.